I'd like to welcome everyone to Liberty Starship, where we go beyond the typical terrestrial talk. I'm Eric Alexander along with Peter Maines. Together, we are your crew. We invite you to join us on the journey to discuss politics and current events. We've got several news briefs for you, including a story about self-driving truckers. We're also going to be covering the story of the USS Theodore Roosevelt and the controversy involving the United States Navy. We're also going to be talking about New York Governor Cuomo's seizure order of PPE and ventilators. That's going to be in our news briefs. But as we normally do, we are going to go ahead and start with something a little bit lighter. This is going to be our daily distractions segment, which has become a daily distraction because it is getting harder and harder to find news stories like this. But I did find one. And the rule that I tried to take is I look for mainstream media outlets and I look at stuff that's on their main page. So here's what I got for you, all right? Here's what I got for you, Peter. This is from CNN, and this was on their main page. It says, if I can get it to come up right, it says, with hair loss on the rise, Asia's men grapple with what it means to be bald. And we've got a nice picture of a bald Asian man here. It says, despite his father having an M-shaped hairline, Alex Han from Northeast China never thought he'd experience hair loss in his 20s. Well, studies have suggested almost all Caucasian men will eventually face some degree of male pattern baldness, and around half can expect to lose their hairs by middle age. Asian men, and East Asians in particular, have historically experienced the lowest incidence of hair loss in the world. A 2010 study from 6 Chinese cities found that fewer than 3% of men aged 18 to 29 and just over 13 of those in their 30s experienced male pattern baldness. Earlier research from South Korea suggested that only 14.1% of the entire male population was affected, while Japanese men were found to develop male pattern baldness approximately a decade later than their European counterparts. Now, this article, I'm going to scroll slowly for you, it goes on and on and on. We got a little experiment there for regenerating hair. And on, Korean studies in the West, all sorts of different quotes, and on, this poor bald guy.
Do they ever explain why people are going bald all of a sudden?
No, the crust of this article is basically about the social stigma in Asian countries, since apparently which by the way I didn't know, apparently they have a lower incident of hair loss. But just look how long this article goes. And I just want to point out, okay, this article is dated. Go here at the top. This is a CNN style article, but I did get it off the main page. This is dated April 4th. April 4th, 2020. And yes, with hair loss on the rise, Asian men grapple with what it means to be bald. What do you think of that, Peter? Is this something that we really should be discussing? Is this a critical issue right now with everything that's going on?
If you're a bald Asian man, it's very important, I'm sure. Look like they had some alternative treatments down there at the bottom. Yeah. Whenever you see a picture of Buddha, he's always bald, so it seems like it can't be that much of a stigma.
Well, the funny thing is, I seem to remember all sorts, obviously there's some stereotypes involved with things, but like, Kung Fu, things like that, they always have, the monks are always bald. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I didn't realize that this was such a problem for Asian men that they tend to go, when they go bald, the few that do, I suppose. But I just found it really, really, really funny. And this is written by a gentleman called Oscar Holland. Apparently he is in the Hong Kong Bureau. And with everything going on, I just found it very, very funny that this is what he decided to talk about,
Well,
I don't know.
Yeah. When Tilda Swinton became an Asian kung fu expert in that one movie, she was bald. So it seems like it's not nearly that uncommon.
Yeah,
there's the stereotype.
Since we got commuters crowd the subway in Beijing, this is a July 2008 photo. Who knows what it looks like now? It says China has traditionally had some of the world's lowest rates of baldness. The changes to people's lifestyle are contributing to an increase in hair loss. I don't know. I think this is like hard news. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't have put in the daily distractions. Maybe that should have been one of my news briefs. So I think that's pretty significant with everything going on.
Well, lucky them. Lucky them. Lower incidence of baldness.
So we are going to move on to our news briefs here. Get into some hard news. Unfortunately, this is the way that the world is right now. It's not a lot of good news to share with you, unfortunately. So we're going to get right into it. These are big issues, liberty issues. And so I wanted to talk about the USS carrier Theodore Roosevelt. And I need to set the stage before we talk about this, because nothing occurs in a vacuum. And I followed this story since it first started breaking. My primary news source has been the Navy Times. The Navy Times does have an interesting angle and a slant, and they do have an angle on a slant. So I want to quickly share this article to set the stage a little bit. Okay, this is a military.com article. And you may remember this. Trump ordered Secretary of Defense to let SEAL keep his Trident pin. Do you remember this story, Peter?
Absolutely.
This SEAL that was accused of murder. He was acquitted. And the Navy still wanted to do some disciplinary action. And that ended up not happening because President Trump intervened personally. And he went ahead and said that this Navy SEAL could keep his Trident pin. And as a result of the controversy, the sitting Secretary of the Navy actually ended up resigning. He was fired. And so the current Secretary of the Navy is the acting secretary. Okay, I think that's important. We have to have contact with this story because of the way that it's being portrayed. I think it's very important to know that and understand that there is a little bit of a war in the Department of the Navy right now, and it is because of this. And it's very much. Go ahead.
So he's the acting secretary because he was appointed by Trump, but he hasn't been approved by the Senate. Is that correct?
Correct. And this is in the wake of that Trident pin controversy. Okay. So right now we have an acting secretary of the Navy. Okay. Like you said, he has not been confirmed. Okay.
And the previous secretary stepped down in protest. Is that what happened?
I think he was fired. I think they kind of tried to spin it, but I think he was basically fired. He was asked. Okay. He was asked to leave. Asked to resign, because that's usually the way it works. They ask for their resignation, so they might be able to save a little face.
Right.
So anyway, that we can't talk about this story without mentioning that, because again, there's an angle to this story. This is the latest. This is the latest headline from 1 hour ago from Navy Times. This is where we are with this story right now. It says no Pentagon response yet, following Secretary of the Navy's harsh criticism of the Theodore Roosevelt's commanding officer. So let's read the story here. It says, as the call rings out from the fleet to Capitol Hill for an investigation into or the firing of acting Navy Secretary Thomas Maudley over his dismissal of the aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt skipper on Thursday, senior Defense Department officials are taking a beat to discuss the situation. In a speech, Maudley, that's the acting Secretary of the Navy, gave over aircraft carrier. In the speech that Maudley gave over the aircraft carrier's intercom system Monday morning, the Navy's top civilian accused Captain Brett Crozier, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing his name correctly, of either being, quote, too naive or too stupid to think that his March 30th email to Navy senior leadership would not be leaked. Maudley then went on to tell sailors that the media is not a resource for them and that they were not required to love their ship's captain. Quote, we have not had an opportunity to talk about the Navy Secretary's remarks that were reported this morning, said senior Pentagon spokesman Jonathan Hoffman, they told reporters on Monday, when asked about whether Secretary of Defense Mark Esper still had confidence in Maudley. Esper is the Secretary of Defense. He's Maudley's boss. Maudley heads the Department of the Navy. Mark Esper heads the Department of Defense. Maudley's speech came after Roosevelt sailors sent Crozier off amid applause, cheering, and chanting on Friday. In the recording, an exasperated sailor can be heard shouting an expletive after Maudley's comments about Crozier's character. And I can tell you one other thing, because he he did that because he did that. He put it in the public's forum. It is now a big controversy in Washington, D.C., Motley said, referencing Crozier's inclusion of personal outside his chain of command on an unsecured email. If he didn't think, in my opinion, that this information wasn't going to get out to the public in this day and information age that we live in, then he was either A, too naive, or too stupid to be the commanding officer of a ship like this. The alternative is that he did this on purpose. Now, this is the crux of the story where we're at right now, okay? So on the one hand, for people that don't know, the commanding officer of the USS Theodore Roosevelt had a corona outbreak happen on his carrier while it was deployed. He basically decided that the best course of action was to remove, basically for the aircraft carrier to stop its mission and remove as many people from the ship as possible and maintain it with a skeleton crew to basically look after the nuclear reactor. He wanted to get 90% of the crew off of the ship. That was what the commanding officer wanted, the captain of the boat, okay?
And that seems perfectly reasonable, does it not?
Yes, and I can give you my personal take in the fact that I did serve on the USS Kearsarge briefly. The USS Kearsarge is an amphibious assault ship. The best way to describe it is it's a small aircraft carrier because it has a deck, so the layout and everything else is similar. There's a big deck on the top of it. There's a huge bay, within the bowels of the ship where you basically have a hangar. It's huge, and the Kearsarge is not as large as the USS Theodore Roosevelt, which is a nuclear aircraft carrier, a full-blown aircraft carrier. I mean, that's a floating city. The Kearsarge isn't quite on that scale, but it's basically a smaller version. Right. And the Kearsarge actually can be even more crowded than an aircraft carrier because the Kearsarge can carry up to 4,000 Marines on it. And the Marine quarters are actually even more cramped than the sailors' quarters.
Now that has Harriers on it, right?
It can, yes. They can be equipped, okay. Like the Kearsarge could be equipped with vertical takeoff aircraft. Usually they have a lot of helicopters and things like that. But yes, it can be equipped with vertical takeoff aircraft as well.
Okay, now, I think I know somebody on the Kearsarge right now.
Awesome. So I've been on that ship. It's actually a pride of my service. When I was in the reserves, I got to help protect that ship during Fleet Week, and I lived on it for 2 weeks. And I lived in the enlisted quarters, sailors' quarters. We were packed 3 high on our bunks, and I used to say it was like sleeping in a coffin. So the quarters are very cramped, okay? So as I like to say, sometimes, especially in today's political environment, we always get kind of it always seems to be true or false. Either you're going to side with the perspective of the acting Secretary of the Navy, who is close to Trump, or you're going to side with these critics of the Trump administration that are actually coming to the defense of its captain, who, by the way, the captain himself has tested positive for COVID-19, for the coronavirus. So he was actually infected as well. The last I heard, by the way, nobody's actually really sick. They all have like minor symptoms. No one's had to be hospitalized. They're basically being housed in hotels in Guam because the ship ended up going to Guam. That's what ended up happening. Now, here's my take, and I'm going a little long on this particular segment because I wanted to give some context. I think we might see a little bit of everybody being wrong, a little bit of with the commander, he did the right thing, and he did it in the wrong way. And now the Secretary of the Navy is getting a little petty, and I think he's kind of being overly emotional. The comments of naive or stupid, that may be what he's thinking. Probably not a good thing to say to the crew right after all these things have happened. The thing you have to remember is that operational security is important in the military. I believe in transparency. I think transparency is very important. But I don't recall ever seeing an article, and if Pete, you've seen one, or if one of our viewers has seen one, I'd be happy to hear about it and see it. I never remember seeing a single article about how coronavirus was affecting the Chinese military and what their numbers of infection were. And of course, we also know that the numbers of infection from China are bullcrap, okay? That they are not accurate.
Right.
So I've never seen an article like that. I haven't seen one about the Italian military. I haven't seen one about the Spanish military and their number of COVID cases. So I do think that the commander leaked this information, not specifically, but he knew what he was doing. He knew the message would be leaked, and he wanted the media to grab onto this. And I believe, quite frankly, he panicked a little bit. So I think he did. I think his heart was in the right place. As you mentioned, I think it's perfectly reasonable what his plan was and what he wanted to do. But the way he did it is the problem. And now the acting Secretary of Defense is making the situation worse by trying to put salt into the wounds and basically tell this crew who thinks of their captain as a hero, telling the crew that this guy's an idiot. This guy's either too naive or stupid to understand the situation. So he kind of go ahead, Pete.
To read that out over the intercom, there's no reason to do that except to embarrass the guy.
Right. And it's an emotional reaction, which is what I think happened with the commander. I think the captain had an emotional reaction because this is a unique situation. COVID-19 is a novel virus. People still, the information is, still out. The data is not that great. And so this captain is on, on limited information. And I think he was thinking he's going to be the captain of a death ship. You know what I mean? Which doesn't seem to be the case. In fact, there is new CDC information that says that as many as 50% of people infected never get sick. They show only mild or no symptoms. That's coming from the CDC right now. Now, the captain of this aircraft carrier may not know that because that's something that I think came out yesterday. And therefore, I think he was thinking, I'm going to have a bunch of dead people on my ship. And it's very, very hard to quarantine people on a ship like that, because the problem is contact tracing is almost impossible because, once you start walking around the ship, you're just going to be infecting everybody. So it's very hard to go backwards and find out, where this person was and all that stuff. You know what I mean? It's very hard to do that. Mm-hmm. So I understand what the captain did. I understand why he did it. At the same time, it wasn't proper the way he did it, and whether he should have actually been fired is absolutely an excellent debate to have. The Chief of Naval Operations, the top uniformed person in the Navy, was advocating for an investigation. Mm-hmm. And what happened was the Secretary of the Navy, acting Secretary of the Navy, overrode him and fired him. So we have to, consider that we don't have to go A or B right now. There's a C, there's even a D. And I think that there was some bad judgment calls made all around. And they continue to be made all around because people are being emotional. And that's what Corona is doing to people. It's making them lose their head and not do basic crisis management. And you're seeing it in our military. But my point is, we shouldn't be seeing this. And the media has to be cognizant of this, that this is not something that will go unnoticed by our adversaries. This is not something that will go unnoticed by the Chinese military. This is not something that will go unnoticed by Iran. This was not something that will go unnoticed by Russia or North Korea. I know about it. Believe me, they know about it. So you have, when you're in the military, you kind of have to, it's mission first. I mean, that's what I was always taught. It's mission first.
So just to get some clarity on this, what you're saying is, and let me know if I understand you correctly, that the problem here is a lack of discipline, that he was trying to put pressure on his superiors by leaking this information, therefore embarrassing him. And that represents a breakdown of discipline. And that's just not acceptable in the military world. And that's the crime, not the fact that he was telling the truth. He should have done it through the proper channels without calling out his bosses, essentially in public.
Yeah, your conclusion is exactly correct. But I want to make the point that I'm talking about operational security and the fact that you do not want to play your hand to other people that are listening out there. Because if I know about it, our adversaries know about it. And this is not something you want to advertise to the international community, that one of our best warships is basically contaminated with COVID-19. We shouldn't be advertising this. We should not be advertising this. And I worry about, I've heard rumors of some bases that are having some infection issues and things like that. And this is not the kind of information we should be disseminating. It really is not the kind of information that should be disseminated right now.
So in addition to the discipline thing, it lets our enemies know that there's potentially a weakness in our defenses because this ship is out of commission, or that base, everybody's infected. So we're not at 100% readiness.
Correct. Correct. That's my point, Pete. That's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah. See, that's the point that I wasn't hearing in the media. That, you know, I would see the headlines, and I wasn't exactly sure what the controversy was. You know, even after I read a couple articles, it seemed like it was a lot of just sort of slap fighting and name calling, and I couldn't really see what anybody's point was. Again,
you know, it's not what he said or did; it's how he did it. I think that's the main takeaway that I would put out there. And the Secretary of the Navy is doing the same thing. You know, there's a way to explain his position without becoming condescending and destroying the morale of that ship, which is what he did. So there's blame all around, folks. It's not A or B. I'm going to go over this other daily brief really quick, just because
go ahead.
It's an evolving story, and I need to get it out there, especially from a Liberty perspective. This is a little older article from 3 days ago from Fox News. Headline says, Cuomo signs executive order to deploy National Guard to round up unused ventilators and PPE. The crux of this story is that Cuomo has authorized the National Guard of the state of New York to start seizing ventilators and PPE, essentially in rural communities. We are seeing the rural-urban divide as never before happening right now in New York. Now, this is an evolving story because the last thing I've heard, Cuomo has said that he thinks New York has plateaued. So this may not come to pass. We're going to have to see what happens. He thinks they may have plateaued. That's the latest news that Cuomo has said about New York, that they may have hit their peak. That's hopeful. We'll see if that happens. But if they haven't, and the deaths start ramping up, he has set into motion the process to basically raid small towns of their ventilators and PPE. And I want to remind everyone, I did research on this. Patient one for community spread in Italy, I'm not talking about, people that came from Japan. We're talking about community spread. In other words, they couldn't trace him. Contact tracing was a problem. Patient one in Italy, which is one of the worst outbreaks, worst deaths in the world, okay? Patient one lived in a town of less than 17,000 people. This is something to think about, folks, okay? If we start robbing Peter to pay Paul, and we start raiding small communities of their maybe one ventilator that they have, or two ventilators, because most rural hospitals are not that well equipped to begin with. They usually have to air evac people for serious trauma and injuries and things like that. Well, there's not going to be anywhere to air evac them. If all the premier hospitals inside New York City and other large cities are already overwhelmed. They're on their own. And I'm very concerned. And I also think this kind of shows how bad the rural-urban divide can get in a time of crisis. So this is an evolving story. Washington State is sending New York ventilators, so that might help their problem. They're taking some of their share of the federal stockpile, and they're sending ventilators to New York. But Cuomo has set in motion the process by which armed National Guardsmen, I would imagine, could go into towns and start taking their equipment. It's a very scary proposition. It's a very scary proposition. Peter, did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, we've talked about martial law here, and it's coming to pass. We're seeing. You've said, these are your neighbors. This is the National Guard. It's not the federal military, and that's true. But this is certainly a major escalation. And it makes you wonder, under what authority can they steal? I mean, this is stealing, right? These people bought these hospitals, bought this equipment to keep their staff safe, and they believe that they need it to keep their staff safe. So it seems like what they're doing is stealing
their community safe. That's the bigger issue. Yeah. This is for the community, to keep the community safe in case they have an outbreak.
So Cuomo is making a gamble that somehow this will bring down the total death toll of New York State. But that's a very dangerous.
Yeah, I think you were just about to say it. It's a very dangerous gamble, because if you have an outbreak in one of these smaller communities that quote unquote is not using this and doesn't quote need it because he decides it, right, then the next thing you know, they have an outbreak and they're screwed. They're completely screwed.
And perhaps the worst part is we'll never really know. It's because it's a counterfactual. We will never really know if more people would have died if he hadn't done this. It's complete speculation.
Correct. And the governor of Washington is being applauded for sending ventilators to New York, but the thing is, he might need them, and so this is a much more complicated issue than one might think. Again, sometimes there's no right or wrong answer. Sometimes it's like all the options kind of suck. But I do want to point this out. I do hope that the news that that New York might have plateaued is correct, and then we don't see this, because it could get ugly. It could get ugly. You could have a situation where a local police force says no to the National Guard. I mean, that scenario is not beyond the realm of possibility. So,
absolutely, we're starting to already see sheriffs and others make statements to that effect,
that they will not comply.
Yeah.
So, now you had a news story as well, right, Pete?
Yeah, also related to the coronavirus and the fallout. And the headline is about trucking. I've been looking around because I'm wondering, what are the things that could cause this crisis to escalate? We've talked about a lack of PPE, a lack of ventilators, a lack of nurses and hospitals and morgues and everything else. But we all need to eat. And one of the big choke points, because truckers get sick too, we rely on them to deliver groceries to our grocery stores. And if they start getting sick, and let's face it, they travel a lot, they meet a lot of people, it seems like they're very vulnerable. And in fact, that's exactly what we're seeing all over the world. Truckers are facing delays. This is something that could make this crisis a lot worse. And I think it's what a lot of people are worried about when they say that they're worried about the economy struggling. What they really mean, nobody worries about your 401k. At least you shouldn't right now. If you're not retiring really soon, that's probably not going to affect your life significantly in the long term. And even if it does, at least you survived. That's what matters. But if we're not able to transport food, this isn't like 100 years ago when most of the population lived on farms. If we're not able to transport food, we could see people starving. I don't think that's an exaggeration. They've mentioned that Europe, South America, Africa are all seeing issues. And so I thought, my thinking was, well, what's the technological solution? Because obviously, if this happened once, this could happen again. So what are people actually going to do to prevent a crisis like this from happening, from mass starvation? I don't know that we're going to see that. It'll come to that, but it's the fact that it's even a possibility means that we should be planning for something like that. So, okay, here's one company that's doing something about it. They're called Plus AI. They are doing artificial intelligence, self-driving trucks. And I was looking through their web page to see exactly how they were doing it. And you may know there are different approaches to how self-driving can work. And their approach appears to me to be sort of a throw it all at the wall, see what sticks, or at least as much redundancy as possible. So they don't just focus on cameras. There's a company that Comma AI that doesn't. You don't have to install any LiDAR. You don't have to install any radar in your car. It relies entirely on cameras. Now it's not 100%, but it's pretty good. But with these trucks, they're not willing to take a chance because there's a lot of money at stake. To be honest. Comma AI is for your personal vehicle. I don't know if I'd be entirely comfortable with that, but their approach is lots of redundancy in multiple detection systems all over. So you have cameras, you have LiDAR, which is lasers, you have radar. So 3 different ways to sense around the car, which means that it says all terrains and all weather. That's because whether you're in the fog or the rain, or if it's sunny, if it's just dark out, the technology that you use might have to be different. Something like a camera may not be as effective at night because you're not going to see as far ahead of you. But if you're using radar and it's foggy out, well, that radar may not be as effective as it normally would be. So this is a really interesting approach. They want to get these trucks by the end of 2020 autonomous and running in 17 states, including Arizona, California, Colorado, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Minnesota, Missouri, Nevada, and more. It was the first autonomous trucking company to test in many of these states. So it's a really cool thing. And what I think is interesting about this is what this does for us from a preparedness standpoint is it prevents us from being reliant on people having to frankly endanger themselves, go from state to state, endangering themselves when you have a virus, because they're going to bring those viruses with them. They're more likely to come in contact because they're going to a lot more different places. They're meeting a lot of different people. And so these people, these truckers, are unfortunately perfect vectors for the virus. I watched an interview with the CEO of this company. They asked him, "Is this going to put a lot of people out of work?" You may remember Andrew Yang made this a big part of his campaign, that he wanted to have this, what he called the freedom dividend, that we would tax artificial intelligence. I don't think that's the right approach, but I do think we need to start automating this. And it's not to say that these truckers aren't heroic, and I'm glad they're doing the job, and I know that they could be thrown out of work, okay? But this will keep the economy safe. This is something that can keep us all safe, so that way we're not reliant on a couple of people. And when I say a couple of people, it's actually a large number of people, but relatively small percentage of the population. We're not reliant on a relatively small number of people who are going to endanger themselves at a time when we don't want to have germs going from country to country, from continent to continent, which is exactly what's happening right now. So
Pete, yeah. I would actually argue that this may be also something going forward that could help with capacity problems, as we might experience problems with the supply chain, because inevitably you are going to have truckers that get sick, and they're going to have to call in sick. We did a story, for instance, last week where we talked about how bad the NYPD has been affected. And these are the guys on the front lines. These are the people truly on the front lines. Your first responders, your truckers, your grocery store workers, because they can't isolate the way and quarantine the way a lot of us can, truckers especially. So we may also see a situation where a lot of these truckers are sick and they're not able to do the job. So that's another angle to think about this, is that this could be not necessarily something that replaces truckers, but supplements them, especially as their numbers might dwindle due to the effects of COVID-19 and the fact that if they are testing positive, they can't drive anymore, period. You know what I mean?
Right. And that's exactly what's happening, is a lot of truckers are becoming sick. That's what's causing the choke point. That's what's causing the slowdown all over the world. You're having truckers test positive for COVID-19 more than a lot of other professions. And we don't think of trucking as being a super dangerous profession. In some ways it is. Obviously, anytime you're driving on the road, you're in danger. They oftentimes sleep in their cabs. That's a danger. But the fact now that they are in danger of these worldwide diseases, this reminds me a lot of the old days, the really old days, when Europeans brought a lot of disease from Europe to the New World. We've seen. I was
actually having that discussion with my daughter today.
Yeah,
we were talking about that.
And so we have a couple choices. One is we simply ride this out. We're going to allow these professions to be a vector for disease. And I know these are working people, and I don't like to see anybody lose their job. But if we can automate this in order to keep us all a little bit safer, in order to keep, I know we're globalizing, and that's great, But if we can do it in a safer way that doesn't put people in unnecessary danger, that should be our goal.
No, I agree with you. But I would say that a plan like this probably is going to take some time to really ramp up. And I think initially this is going to be more of a supplementary solution than a quote unquote full solution. It's going to take time.
Well, this is what's called level 4 automation. That's where they say that they're at right now. So it's not entirely end to end, but it can go if you only have to travel on the interstate, it can do that. And that means that the trucker himself doesn't necessarily you don't have to have somebody on board the entire time. Or you could have that person doing something else, potentially. But the bottom line is you can reduce the number of people that a trucking company necessarily needs to employ.
It's very interesting. Very interesting path forward.
Yeah. And you have to be careful because, George Hotz, who runs Comma AI, says if you always need to have somebody behind the wheel, well, that's not really a useful invention because we already know how to make cars drive with somebody behind the wheel. You have the person drive. So, yeah, there has to be some common sense in how we actually use this technology out in the wild.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Are we ready to get into some of our main topics?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So I've been talking about this quite a bit. I am advocating people to start using this hashtag Masks for All. I've used it quite a bit on Twitter, on the official Liberty Starship Twitter. And I have a lot of good information for you. Now, I'm going to start out a little negative because I am a little upset. There is some righteous anger out there, and I am going to address it because it has to be addressed. We have to have accountability. I think very possibly, as you know, and I'm sure you know, Pete, recently the CDC changed their tune, and we are in Masks for All officially. That's official policy now. It is still voluntary, but the official CDC recommendation is masks for all. And so it's time to get educated on masks, people, okay? I have over 20 years of experience as a public safety professional, as a first responder on the front lines, responding to incidents in the field, dealing with people with airborne infectious diseases like tuberculosis, where we would have to mask those people. We were trained to mask those people, okay? So I know a little bit of what I'm talking about, all right? So, and I did a lot of research for you so that you guys can make some good, informed decisions. Now, I think one of the reasons that we finally got this turn was because of this Wired article. I'm convinced this Wired article, because Wired is a popular platform. This article is dated March 30th, okay? And this is the headline. It says, "It's time to face facts. America, masks work." It says, "Official advice has been confusing, but the science is hard to grok. Everyone should cover up." And we did say that in our last episode. We advised people, cover up, mask up. You heard it here first for a lot of you, okay?
And I've noticed people on Twitter adding masks work to their Twitter handle or to their Twitter name. Yeah.
Awesome. So here's how they start out. When you look at photos of Americans during the 1918 influenza pandemic, one feature stands out above all else: masks. Fabric, usually white gauze, covers nearly every face. Across the country, public health experts recommend universal mask wearing, and some cities ordered residents to wear them under penalty of fine or imprisonment. We're talking about the Spanish flu, okay? The Red Cross made thousands of cloth masks and distributed them for free. Newspapers published instructions on sewing masks at home. Quote, "Make any kind of mask and use it immediately at all times," the Boston Commissioner of Health pleaded. "Even a handkerchief held in place over the face is better than nothing." This is 1918, folks. 1918. They advised this. This was official policy for the United States of America. There's a great picture in this article. You've probably seen it. There it is. I love this picture. I love it. This is from Seattle at the height of the Spanish flu. This is Seattle PD, Seattle's finest. They are all masked up. Okay, 1918. Why have we lost? Why did we forget this lesson? Why do we forget this lesson? I'm going to get into it. But what's so great about this article is it actually cites the actual peer-reviewed scientific studies that tell us, yes, something is better than nothing, folks. The science was there all along. There is no new information. The Surgeon General lied. The head of the CDC lied. And I'm going to get into why I think they lied and what our path forward is now and how we can try to fix this and how they can try to fix this and maybe save a little face and maybe try to kind of reverse this policy that I think has cost people their lives, because we have a large number of deaths in the United States already, and not masking up was a huge mistake. And it was something that we did because our medical professionals, our medical community told us not to. So we have some different studies that were done. They're cited in this article. And the main takeaway from these scientific studies is that, first of all, masks work. The surgical masks, the actual surgical masks, surgical grade masks, and N95 masks are basically about the same. We've heard all sorts of lies that surgical masks are not as good as N95 masks. They are. Science says they are. Okay. Now, when it comes to homemade masks, let's see if I can find the paragraph here. Because they cite several studies where they compared homemade masks. So meanwhile, several studies have tested the performance of masks improvised from household materials. A 2008 paper, Pete, 2008 paper, found that masks made from kitchen towels were about half as protective as surgical masks. And part of this article talks about how surgical masks are the same as N95 masks. We're talking about influenza. We're talking about aerosolized infections. Just as effective. Okay. For a study published in 2013, scientists compared the filtration efficiency of surgical masks to linen, silk, a scarf, a kitchen towel, a pillowcase, a vacuum cleaner bag, and masks that volunteers made 100% cotton t-shirts. The surgical mask performed best, followed by the vacuum cleaner bag and kitchen towel, but the latter was too thick and stiff to be worn for long periods of time. Consider this, folks. If you're not going to wear it because it's impeding your breathing or it's too uncomfortable, that's not a good mask choice for you. You need to do a mask choice that you are going to actually wear and use. The t-shirt masks were comfortable and 1/3 as effective as the surgical masks. So not as good as surgical. And by the way, surgical as good as N95 according to these other studies, but they were still better than nothing. You know, better than nothing, which we were told by so many medical professionals, no, something is not better than nothing. No, you're too stupid to wear a mask. Says our findings suggest that a homemade mask should be considered as a last resort, the authors wrote, but quote, it would be better than no protection. A 2010 study reached nearly identical conclusion.
Now we were told, sorry, I just to jump in here a little bit. We were told by a lot of health officials that these masks could actually be more dangerous because they carry germs and they wouldn't be cleaned properly, that they would be more likely to carry the virus than protect you from the virus. Do you remember hearing that?
Pete, that's a good segue into what I wanted to talk about next. That's an excellent segue. So I wanted to talk about why did they lie to us? Why did they lie to us? There's some righteous anger here, and I feel that righteous anger right now. And I think it's three main points. First of all, the Surgeon General has alluded to this in his tweets. He's kind of admitted to what he did, okay? We have the supply hoarding issue. We had hoarding happen very early, even before people were starting to take this seriously. Probably people that I knew in the prepper community started hoarding the damn masks, which is the worst thing they could have done. It is the worst thing they could have done. The masks are most effective if everyone wears them, not you. It is a community effort. We all have to wear them for them to be most effective, because they're most effective with people that are infected but not sick. That's news. There are many more people infected than what the tests tell us, and the CDC is now saying as many as 50% of those infected never get sick. Think about that. And they are spreading this infection all over the place. So when you see these numbers, you see those laughable Chinese numbers. These numbers are like 10, 20 times the numbers of the tests. Okay, that's what we're being told right now. Okay, so it's so essential that everybody wear a mask. So legitimately, there's a supply problem. We had people go and hoard masks, N95 masks. We had them hoard surgical masks, and we haven't been able to find them for months. I haven't been able to find one for months. Okay. Luckily for me, I have a small supply on my own. Okay, that I bought in my prepper days. So I actually have a small supply of expired N95 masks, which again are better than nothing. Folks, they're better than nothing. So we have the supply hoarding issue, which was legitimate, and they should have explained this to us, but they don't trust us with that information. That's the first point. It's a legitimate concern. But I would say one thing that I'm upset about is first responders, fire and police, and ambulance drivers, EMS, should have gotten the same priority as the rest of our healthcare professionals, and they didn't. That image I showed you is from 1918. I bet you the 2020 Seattle Police Department is not doing universal masks. So, because nobody is. They don't have enough. And they were told before the cotton masks didn't work. And I just told you the cotton masks work. The cotton masks do work. They do reduce the transmission of the infection. These are old studies, folks. These are old studies. That's the righteous anger. The second thing is cultural bias. As I mentioned before, in 1918, we were better, and we all started wearing masks, okay? It was universal. It was required in many communities in 1918. That's also happened in Japan. But in Japan, the culture never got rid of that mindset. And we know the numbers are much lower in Japan, and I am putting forth the theory that the reason numbers are low in Japan is because of universal mask wearing. That's what's keeping the numbers under control in Japan, because Japan is not doing very much. They're not doing hardly anything, but they all wear masks, and they also are socially distant to begin with. The culture is socially distant, okay? They don't like to handshake. You know, they bow, you know what I mean? Those kind of things are helping them, in my opinion. And the science tells me that that's true, because the science says that if we all wear masks, we will reduce transmission of this disease. That's the science, folks. This article cites the studies. And I will share this article in the description of the YouTube version of the show so you can look for yourself. All of the studies are cited in this article. It is an excellent article. And this reporter did excellent reporting. I wish there were more reporters like him for breaking this story.
Right. And if you say that these masks are only half as effective as the other masks, we should remember that, you know, the growth may be geometric. We're seeing geometric growth, but if you slow the growth, that has geometric benefits too. So I just did the math here. If the growth of the virus is 15% every day, after 10 days, you have 4 times as many cases as when you started. But if you double that rate to 1.3, 30% growth every day, then you have 13, almost 14 times as many cases at the end of 10 days. So this is literally killing people right now, lying to people, because again, they're trying to sort of engineer people a little bit, nudge them in the way that they thought, but they couldn't contain it because the truth is out there. These studies aren't secret studies. This isn't secret information. And once the cat is out of the bag, then all trust is lost.
Peter, this article, you can see they have like the little underline. This is a very well-cited article. You can go directly to the scientific studies that were peer-reviewed. These are peer-reviewed public studies that were done in 2008, okay? 2008. If you recall, our last pandemic was actually in 2009 with H1N1, and I lived through that. I got the flu and pneumonia at the same time during H1N1, where we did almost nothing. We did almost absolutely nothing. My infant daughter had H1N1. Right. That was very, very scary. Very, very scary. So we thought she might die, okay? Because it was killing babies. So here's the third part, Pete. Here's the third part of why did they do this. And this also is legit. This is where you come in. This is where I come in. This is what I really want to leave with people. Improper use of masks. You must know some basics about how you wear a mask, donning and doffing, putting it on, taking it off. If you're going to make homemade masks, you need to have some controls. You need to have some procedures. And I'm going to try to discuss a little bit about that. The biggest thing I see, ever since the CDC changed the guidelines, I'm seeing more people with masks. So that's good. A lot of them even have surgical masks and N95 masks. They seem to be more prevalent than I thought they were, at least in my neighborhood, okay? I'm seeing quite a bit of them. I am not seeing a lot of the improvised masks, and we need to see the people that don't have the N95 masks and the surgical masks, we need to see them mask up. But here's something about those of you that are lucky enough to have an N95 or a surgical mask, because they're the most effective. Here's something that I see all of you people in my community doing wrong. Stop touching the damn mask and stop touching your face. And that is what the doctors, the people that knew this information, they think you're too stupid to do that. And you're showing them you are. I literally saw someone in my grocery store with an N95 mask, and he had pulled it down under his nose. That means he's constantly adjusting the damn thing, you know, depending, I guess, on contact. Who knows what his procedure is? You know what I mean? Don't touch the damn mask once you put it on. Do not touch it unless, at a minimum, you have used hand sanitizer. You should be washing your hands first and then don the mask.
Well, the other now you're making my face itch.
Right. Well, then with the surgical mask, remember, one thing that's nice about the surgical mask, first of all, they're more comfortable. I wore an N95 mask on my shopping trip. You can get winded with those things very easily. Again, the N95 mask is not any use to you if you're not going to wear it properly. That is true, okay? You're much better off with a more comfortable mask, and that's why I'm giving you options here. The surgical masks are more comfortable, and they use loops around your ears. That's usually how you can kind of tell the difference between the N95 and the surgical. The N95, they have like straps. The surgical masks have loops, okay? If nothing else, you can look for that. Well, the loops, that's how you want to don and doff the surgical mask. You want to touch the loops and touch the part by your mouth as little as possible. And you never want to touch them without clean hands. At the very least, hand sanitizer, I would advise you to wash your hands. This whole system is going to be more effective if you use the trifecta. Wash your hands first before you handle your mask. Mm-hmm. Wash your hands first, don the mask, and keep your social distance. If you do those three things, you are less likely to acquire COVID-19, but you are even much less likely, if you have COVID-19 and don't know it, to pass it on to anybody. So do those three things, okay? It's very important. And like I said, if you cannot keep that N95 mask that you hoarded on your face and you keep adjusting it, you've completely lost the point. So
wash your hands, put it on, don't touch it.
Don't touch it. And again, this is why it's important to look at these variety of masks. And so I am going to dramatically show my face for the first time on this. I have been wearing the most simple mask that is scientifically proven to reduce infection. I am wearing a shirt over my face, okay? This is a 100% cotton t-shirt. Now, the really nice thing about it is if the elastic is still good, it gives you that little seal over your nose. And I have been wearing this the entire time that I've been broadcasting. I've been talking. It does get hot, but it is very comfortable. It is much more comfortable than my N95 mask. It's much more comfortable. If you do nothing, this is what I want to leave people with. If you do nothing, do this. This is very easy. You get a nice little seal, the pinch, like with some of the homemade masks, you're advocating tin foil, paper clips, because you want to get that little pinch. It's important to get that little pinch on your nose. And if the elastic is decent in your shirt, you get it. The other thing that's nice about this is the CDC is advocating shirt masks, and they're telling you how to cut them. Stupid. You don't have to cut it. And you're losing the elastic if you do it the way the CDC is telling you to. They don't use the elastic, okay? They tell you to cut the bottom of it and make little straps. It's stupid, okay? I didn't do anything to this shirt. I didn't do anything to it. I just put it on over my head. I have the elastic. It gives me the nice little seal on my nose. And then all I did was took the sleeves and tied it around. And then I can tuck in the excess and look, I've actually got more coverage than a surgical mask right now or an N95 mask in terms of more of my face is covered. And that's going to help me with all this stupid thing that people are doing. Don't do this. Don't do that. Okay? But if you're one of those people that has to touch it all the time, at least now your face is covered more. You know what I mean? There's less chance of you of you infecting yourself, others, all that kind of stuff. If you do nothing else, just do this. You do not have to cut it. You don't have to do anything with it. I will have a link from the person that showed me this. I will put his YouTube link as far as, and he also does a bandana mask, and he also does a paper towel mask. And the thing that's nice about paper towel masks is if in the future you get your hands on filters, you can incorporate a filter into the paper towel mask, and you can also incorporate a filter in the bandana masks. Okay. So, but please, folks, I showed you the science. It's there. This is the bare minimum. You don't even need scissors. All you need is a decent 100% cotton shirt. And I'm telling you, don't do it the CDC way because it's stupid. Cutting and all this stuff and trying to get the straps. I don't know what they're doing. This is all you got to do. This is all you got to do. And look, it's tucked under my my collar. Good to go, folks. Good to go. And the studies showed with normal people in the study, this was the most comfortable option. In other words, the mask doesn't work if you don't wear it. If you're constantly playing with it and taking it off, and try the other options. You can Google it. Try the vacuum cleaner mask, which is the most effective homemade mask. If you think you can do it, if you can sew, especially, think about doing the vacuum cleaner mask. Because vacuum cleaner bags are still out there. People haven't figured out that trick yet. Okay? So
not much longer.
The CDC is also advocating coffee filter masks and shows you how to make that. And I thought that one was pretty good. But what I don't like about the CDC's t-shirt mask is they make you cut it. And they make you have little straps. They basically make you cut it like a little surgical mask. And it's not necessary. And people are lazy. They're not going to do it. You know what I mean? So do the most simple thing, at least, folks. And I will try to get information about how to clean, like if you're N95 or your surgical mask. I'm working on stuff like that. There is a Stanford study that does say that you can sterilize your N95 mask with your oven. There's all sorts of good stuff out there, folks. And Pete, where's your mask? Where's your mask, huh?
Well, thankfully, I'm not going to infect anybody through the internet, as far as I know.
Set the example. That's the other thing.
I should set the example. You're right. Okay, next week we'll do.
Set the tone. I challenge every politician. I challenge Governor Ducey. I challenge the Surgeon General, and I challenged him on Twitter. He's not going to acknowledge me. But maybe if enough of us do, maybe the Surgeon General will start wearing a mask. Maybe Donald Trump will start wearing a mask because he has that cultural bias too. That bias is going to kill people. I don't like masks.
I've noticed a lot of older people, they're afraid of looking silly, and that's sad. It's dangerous because they're the most at risk. And Donald Trump, who is a germaphobe, he is really afraid of shaking hands.
That's true.
He doesn't like when people cough around him. Do you remember how he freaked out when Mick Mulvaney was coughing around him? He doesn't like it, but he still won't wear a mask because he's afraid it makes him look like a dork.
Right. And I think I look pretty badass, honestly.
Yeah.
I think, by the way, you can do this another way where you're full ninja. There's another way to do the fold and full ninja. Come on. Who doesn't want to be a ninja?
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. But I've heard that from just so many people, and it's just time to get over it.
So mask for all, please start using it. I didn't come up with that. That's something that I found out there in the wild. So that's just my message for everybody. This is really easy. And again, the CDC one is just, it's good that there's no sewing, but people aren't going to do that. They're not going to cut it and everything like that. You know what I mean? Make it as simple as possible. Make it as simple as possible. That's all I have, Pete. I want to leave everybody with that. So.
Well, thank you. So I wanted, if you could just throw this up here. talked on my little mini-sode. I think you'll listen to that, Eric, where I was talking about how things could get a lot worse, and I made a prediction, which I think probably sounded very radical when I made it. In fact, after I put the episode out, I thought, boy, I sound crazy for saying this. I said we could be at each other's throats. We could be fighting each other like at no time since the American Civil War, and then I heard Eric Weinstein say that, or Weinstein. I'm sorry, I don't remember which one is the right way now that you have the other Weinstein, the bad one, who's in jail with coronavirus. But he was saying that he believes, and this very smart man, he's Peter Thiel's CFO, that he believes that there could be unrest. And so I started thinking, okay, if I'm thinking this and he's thinking this, and historically there's a precedent that when you have pandemics, when you have mass death and a lot of dislocation, there's going to be a lot of economic dislocation. Things are going to get nuts here. We could start seeing, if not in the United States, around the world. And so I thought, okay, well, where are the hot spots? Where are the places that we're going to see instability? I started doing a little research on Google, and all these stories started popping up about Iran. Here's a news story, and let me give you the context here. This comes from Radio Farda. Radio Farda is, I don't want to say American propaganda, but it's the Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty people. So this is subsidized by the U.S. government, which is why I thought this was a really interesting and sort of odd headline. It says, politician in Iran says Tehran and Washington unnaturally close to war. And if you go down through the article, this politician, his name is Heshmatollah Falaha Pishech. He's a member of the Iranian parliament. And when I started doing a little bit of digging into his background, he's described as a former hardliner who is now trying to avoid conflict between the U.S. and Iran. And I don't know how seriously to take any of this because, again, this is an American-funded story. But if you read the headline, you look at what's being reported, it almost seems like an anti-American story. At the very bottom, he warns that oops, I don't see the quote here. Arguing that it could be a trap set by Washington. They said that Iranian leaders should stay away from conflict with the United States and Iraq, arguing that it could be a trap set by Washington. Now, that's a strange thing for an American government news source to say. Are they trying to send them? Who are they trying to send a message to? Are they trying to send a message to the Iranians saying, don't go into Iraq because that's just what the Americans want you to do? But the Iranians know this is American published. This is American funded. So why would they buy into this? Are they reading this? This doesn't seem like they could be the audience. And the other thing that I thought was, well, this is basically the State Department. And we all know in the State Department, there are a lot of people who don't like the president very much. So is this message somehow a jab at President Trump? I really don't know. It's so strange to figure. I cannot figure out the angle of this reporter. In fact, you commented on this. We exchanged some messages that even reporting this seems like it could be pro-Iranian, and that's certainly not my goal. My goal is to understand myself and help you at home to understand what's going on. And what's going on is right now a lot of news sources. This isn't the only one, but this is one that I thought was especially worth looking at because of who it is that's publishing it. But you have the Associated Press. And other
I have a point I'd like to bring up before you move on with that, because it was just coming to me. Because remember, in my report, I was referencing the Spanish flu of 1918. Okay, mm-hmm. One of the reasons that the Spanish flu of 1918 has been forgotten is because it happened at the same time as World War I. Okay.
Yes.
And World War I takes precedence historically over the Spanish flu. And also, what happened is it's difficult to study. Because what a lot of countries, first of all, a lot of countries had propaganda and they had press controls, including the United States during World War I. The reason it's called Spanish flu is because Spain was neutral and they were the first country to actually report on the pandemic because they didn't have press controls, and the King of Spain became sick. Okay, so other governments were able to use World War I as cover for the pandemic. The question becomes, could we see a nation or several nations use that in reverse, where they're trying to cover the pandemic? Because I don't trust Iran's numbers at all. I think Iran, China, Russia, North Korea, those numbers are worthless. Okay, they are not reporting what's going on, and they're not going to be transparent. Those numbers are almost worthless. Okay, I should say they're almost worthless. North Korea says they have no infections. By the way, I looked that up before the program. North Korea says
well,
no.
Good for them.
Zero. Okay,
that's amazing.
So anyway, my point is, could this happen in reverse? Could a government decide to cover up my pandemic debt? Could I start a war and cover up how bad things are in my country? I think it's a legitimate question to ponder, Pete. I really think it is.
Yes, yeah, exactly. That's a very good point. And you're going to have a lot of people out of work. You know, you've shut the economy down in a lot of countries. What's something you can do with a lot of unemployed young men? Send them to war. That's historically what has happened a lot of the time when societies have what they view to be a surplus of young men that they don't know what to do with, that are just on the streets causing trouble. And so I wonder if a lot of these rumblings aren't the result of Iran saber rattling in order to try to draw the United States into a conflict and to sort of wag the dog and distract from their own crisis.
I have heard of satellite images that show mass graves in Iran. I don't know if you've heard about that reporting, but there is apparently satellite images that show evidence of mass graves in Iran. That they are completely lying about their numbers, which means they're lying to their people, they're lying to the international community. And when a nation like that starts lying, okay, you need to be really concerned. How far will they go to preserve the lie? And then you also have to couple that with the neocons and the hawks within the deep state within our government that would like nothing more than to wipe Iran off the map. You know what I mean?
Right.
Make no mistake. There are people in our government that would like nothing more than a war with Iran.
Well, per capita, there's about 150 countries in the world. Per capita, Iran is number 15 in terms of deaths. And that's officially. Those are the numbers that they acknowledge. So if you're right and they're covering up the true numbers and it's much worse, then that means they're not number 14. They're closer to number 1 in terms of death per million population. And that's something that could, and it isn't a surprise. Their economy has been rocked over the past few years by sanctions. They're a totalitarian dictatorship. There's not a lot of spread of information. They're certainly not a free society. So a lot of the protections that they should have, and they're also not China. You've talked about China has the will to do things that other countries can't do, the ability to do things that other countries can't do. Iran is not a desperately poor country. They're not Cuba, but they're not China either in terms of prosperity. And so you wouldn't.
The means is how I talk about it, because China is a rich country, and Iran is not.
Right. Yeah. So this politician who is saying that we're close to war, he's been described as a former hardliner who is now in trying to work for peace. Again, I don't know how seriously to take this. This is from the Iran Project, and I don't know exactly what their perspective is. They sort of paint themselves on their website and their about page as being reformers, that they are Iranians both inside and outside of the country. But again, this could just be Iranian propaganda. And here he says that President Trump gained nothing from the strike. And he says basically he's trying to say that Bolton was the smart one, but now he's out and, or as he puts it, Bolton and U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo were like the two blades of scissors, meaning essentially that that they were complementary to each other, that Bolton had hard policies and Pompeo had soft policies. I don't know that that's true. That doesn't strike me as being very accurate. I don't think that Pompeo is necessarily a soft power or a soft policy guy. That would be more like Mike Lee or Rand Paul. But I'm not in Iran, so maybe this is true. But it strikes me that that this doesn't ring true. His analogy doesn't exactly make sense, at least from my reading of American politics. So if you'd like to go, I just brought up the Iran Project.
Yeah, I don't think right now we have like a Powell Rumsfeld. You know what I mean? Because obviously
right.
Powell was a little bit more of a moderating voice. Rumsfeld was a definite hawk. You know what I mean? And
right.
Poor Colin Powell, he got manipulated with the UN address, but they were a bit more complimentary in that regard. In that, you know, right. Powell was a kind of a much more measured, you know, rational, you know, kind of tone, and Rumsfeld was very much the hawk. You know what I mean? So I don't really see that. You know, with I agree with you. I just don't really see that with Bolton and Pompeo.
I would say that the previous Secretary of State, the former executive of Enron, Rex Tillerson, sorry, not Enron, Exxon, Rex Tillerson, he was more of a moderating force, but he didn't get along with the president, so he was out and Pompeo was in. But if there's anybody right now who's a moderating force on President Trump in terms of, and I shouldn't even say a moderating force on President Trump, because President Trump is not an interventionist. His instincts, as far as I can tell, are to be less interventionist, more pro-peace. And you have Mike Lee and you have Rand Paul who golf with him. They're very close to the president. And so I don't think there's nobody there. But if you're relying on Pompeo to be the Colin Powell of this administration, you're going to be sorely disappointed. So you were saying that they don't have the means to do what they need to do, and they've had trouble for a long time. In fact, you brought this up again in our conversations, that they just killed 2,000 of their own people, and nobody said anything. The Iranian government just killed 2,000 of their own people, and because of the corona crisis, basically the whole world has been silent. What do you know about that situation?
I don't know a whole lot of specifics, again, because it was not highly reported, but I remember reading the report. I remember reading the article before really any of the COVID-19 corona stuff happened, before that was even trending or anything like that. This was a story from a few months back, and it was a protest issue where they had killed about 2,000 protesters, and yeah, hardly a peep. And I did want to mention, because I didn't have a chance to read it, but you did share an article on our Twitter about the prison situation in Iran. Can you elaborate on that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just bring up the article. There's been a number of stories. There have been riots. And here's the article that I shared on Twitter. There have been a number of riots in Iran within their prisons. You know, it's kind of hard. And I joked today, you know, if you're in an Iranian prison and you have the option of breaking out, why don't you do it? Why did it take coronavirus for these people to riot and break out of prison? You had 74 inmates broke out of Iranian prisons during the coronavirus. 20 of them have been captured, but 54 are still at large. And a lot of them, you know, let's face it, these are Iranian prisons. These aren't American prisons. These people aren't bank robbers. They're not murderers, a lot of them. Maybe some of them are, okay? But a lot of these people are just political prisoners. And that's one of the other stories that I wanted to talk about, was that, you know, people are shouting that they were not dangerous, and they were yelling shame, shame at their prison guards, because they know they're political prisoners and they're in jail. They're in jail in Iran for no crime. They've committed no crime, and now they could die because they're in close quarters. This isn't the most sanitary place to be. There's a lot of, they are really, really vulnerable for infection. And this just adds to the pressure that is on the Iranian government, because the people of Iran know this is happening. This isn't exactly a secret. I mean, we're reading it here in English on websites like Iran News Update and Middle East Eye and let's see, Al Monitor. You know, these are not a secret. It's not a secret. This is all over the internet, and people in Iran do know this is happening. And economists are warning again. This goes right back to the American-funded radio Farda. But they say economists in Iran warn president of possible unrest amid coronavirus damage. So Iran is, I think, if they were in danger of having a revolution before, they are much more in danger now. And the United States, a lot of countries could see unrest. We could see a lot of things happening that would shock us. And even if it's not a bloody uprising, literal pitchforks or people with AK-47s marching on Washington, what we could see are more extreme politicians and parties coming to power, because if people are frustrated and they feel like Washington doesn't know what to do, they're going to be open to a lot more voices. They're going to be open to ideas from people like Bernie Sanders, like the Ron Pauls, like Donald Trump, who normally or in previous years might have been considered outside of the mainstream. People are going to get fed up. And if that's true in the United States, it's going to be way more true in places like Iran, where the people are already very suspicious of their government.
I wanted to go back to the prison issue, especially talk about like the possibility of Iran being a roadmap. There have been reports of major prison riots in Colombia. There's a lot of especially poor countries that have deplorable conditions in their prisons. And I have connections within the corrections industry, and I am trying to reach out to them to find out what some of the situations might be in Arizona and other places. This is something that we got to keep an eye on, and this is something that can be a major destabilizing force in a lot of these countries. And because we have a very large prison population, I have warned about this. Hospitals, prisons, dormitories, nursing homes. My father lives in a nursing home. As you may recall, one of the first outbreaks we had with significant community transmission was in Washington with the nursing home. Nursing home was ground zero. So these places have to be protected, and we have to come up with a plan. And of course, the biggest issue is, as far as I know, most prisons in the United States, they've locked out the visitors, but you still have to deal with the staff. And one thing that I'm very worried about is that proper protection is not being taken for the staff. And that's who I really care about. So I'm talking about like violent, some of the worst prisons, the highest level prisons in the country. And I'm very worried about the staff becoming infected and then bringing that infection to that environment. And then the next thing you know, everybody in that prison is infected. People start dying. You're talking about violent criminals and the perfect storm that happens there. Meanwhile, like as you're speaking about in many other countries, these people are not violent criminals. They are political prisoners, and they could die in mass. You know what I mean? Massive amounts of them could end up dying. So this is a big issue, and it can cause tremendous amount of instability in ways that we don't really know yet, because this hasn't exactly happened. There is the Katrina example. I'm not sure how familiar you are with what happened in Katrina, but in Katrina, they made the decision to let everybody out of jail because they couldn't transport them. They didn't have a plan. And those thugs, they were out there murdering, pillaging. That's a big reason for why the gun seizure started to happen, because it was out of control. It was absolutely out of control what happened. And many of the police, I read a study about this after the fact. Many of the police, you think of New Orleans as a very corrupt police department, and they are known as one of the most corrupt police departments in the country. But a study showed most of the officers didn't go to work because they weren't able to. So you can have a perfect storm situation with officers being sick. We reported earlier about, 12% of the NYPD is currently out sick. That's a huge amount. That's larger. The amount of people they have sick is larger than the entire Phoenix Police Department. I mean, that's the perspective we have to have here. It's a perfect storm scenario, Pete. So It's something we really got to keep an eye on.
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of conservatives on Facebook were complaining that, the California government, they're so liberal, they're letting people out of prison. And this is an example of people being stuck in their ideology, of being blinded to what's going on in front of them because they have a list of talking points and they haven't updated their software. They're not responding to what's going on right in front of them, which is we have far too many people in prison to be able to take care of in a situation like this. And yes, these prisons could be, I mean, if half the prison population dies, or, you know, a huge percentage of the prison population dies, are we facing lawsuits? Do we just say, well, you know, tough, that's part of the punishment of having committed a crime is that you die of coronavirus? You know, at what point does it become a human rights issue? And what do their families do in the wake of this? So it's not as simple as simply saying, well, you know, I think these are bad people, so they deserve whatever comes to them. You know, that's not realistic. That's a really easy position to take because it's kind of sounds right, kind of sounds like a moral position. But this is moral vanity. It's virtue signaling, but for the right. So,
yeah, there's a lot of different angles for the potential for problems, and definitely prisons are something that we gotta keep an eye on.
Yeah, and when we're talking about countries like Iran where there could be unrest, we're not only talking about unrest because their prison situation could get out of control. By the way, there was an American who was let out of an Iranian prison temporarily, sent to the Swiss embassy in Iran, in Tehran, and it was on the condition that he comes back afterwards. Can you imagine sending somebody back to an Iranian prison? Somebody that you know is probably basically innocent, sending them back to an Iranian prison because the Iranian government says, oh, that's the deal. I can't even, you know, I understand why politically they're going to have to do it because they don't want to have to break off relations. Switzerland is neutral. They don't want to have to break off relations with Iran, but that would be a really hard decision to make. So I'm going to leave on one more thing, which is the prison situation is difficult, and it's much more difficult than a lot of people want to admit. We want to sort of fall back on platitudes. We want to fall back on get back into our comfort zone of easy ideological answers. But here is something that's really important. Iran is now a nuclear power. And what happens to their nukes? Just like when the Soviet Union fell, we were very concerned. What happens to their nuclear weapons when they're overthrown? Well, with Iran, we know what happens in the Middle East when governments are overthrown. When the Egyptian government was overthrown, the Muslim Brotherhood came to power. When the Syrian government was being battered and no longer had control of most of the country, ISIS came to power. If the Iranian government is overthrown, we can't just assume that the next people who take control are going to be Democrats. They're going to be liberal Democrats in the Western European or American or Canadian mold. And even if they are, even if the best case scenario happens, that doesn't mean that it's going to happen smoothly or all at once. And what does happen to their nuclear material? Does it go to a different power in the region? Does it go to Iraq? Does it go to Syria? Does it get into the hands of groups like Hezbollah? We really don't know. But we do need to keep an eye on this because this affects our security as well.
This is also something that has to be looked at with North Korea, where we're getting no information at all. Again, North Korea, official report, we're fine. Everybody's fine. Nothing to see here. Nothing to see here. Move along, please. Move along.
Nothing at all. Well, you know, they've been kind of in self-quarantine for 60 years, 70 years now. So who knows? Maybe that's right.
I think that's impossible. It's a very poor border. I've looked into that. The border controls are not good for North Korea and China because people have to go to China to get something to eat. It's similar to the situation with Venezuela and Colombia. Mm-hmm. And I actually was concerned about that because Colombia was looking at, and I believe they did close their borders, and the destabilizing effect that's going to have on Venezuela. So again, you know, we were talking about as Iran as a roadmap. There are multiple hotspots that could be emulating Iran's situation. As I mentioned, Venezuela, North Korea. These are other places where we have to worry about something like that happen. And we do have to worry about it happening in the Western democracies as well, because you know these issues with things like prison riots and things like that. That could happen. That could happen here just as easily as it's happening over there. And quite frankly, we have the situation where people want political cover. You know, again, I go back to the 1918 situation and the fact that the United States did not accurately report the situation, and that's what made it worse because they were in a wartime propaganda footing. So they were not transparent initially about the Spanish flu. There's a precedent for this. There's a precedent for this.
And one final note, and I think we should, cap it after this, but we've mentioned Iran, and you just mentioned Venezuela. And the United States has increased sanctions on Iran. And Venezuela, you may have heard that Nicolas Maduro was convicted of drug dealing a few weeks ago, which a lot of people sort of shrugged their shoulders and said, well, why does he care? He's not leaving Venezuela. They're not going to extradite their own president. Why on earth are we convicting? Why are we wasting our time convicting Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, of drug dealing? It makes no sense until you realize we're trying to destabilize these countries. Now, that's not entirely bad, right? These are bad regimes, and we shouldn't feel sorry. If they fall tomorrow, we should not feel sorry for the Ayatollahs or for Nicolas Maduro, who's been an absolutely terrible president. He has committed human rights abuses, just atrocities that are completely unspeakable. But if we say that we should never let a crisis go to waste, well, the United States government is not letting this crisis go to waste. Things are in motion, and don't think these things are unconnected. Whatever the saber rattling is about on Radio Farda, whatever this business is with Nicolas Maduro, it absolutely is related. The government is aware that these countries are under stress the same way we are, and they're trying to tighten the screws in the hopes that we can break things loose and make some geopolitical gains here in the midst of this crisis, because things will change. Some countries will get stronger, some countries will get weaker. And I think the United States government right now is hoping that we're going to come out the victors in this chess match.
Very true.
Well, do you have anything else that you would like to add, or are you ready to sign off, Eric?
I'm pretty much ready to go. Again, wear a mask, people. This is the easiest one to do. Okay, wear a mask. Masks for all.
Masks for all. Yeah, masks for all. Hashtag masks for all. Well, my name is Pete Maines. I'm here with Eric Alexander. And until next week, you keep flying free.